Welcome back, focused learners. Let's just jump right in, shall we? Today's explainer is a journey to uncover the foundational language of the entire internet.
I mean, have you ever actually wondered what invisible skeleton holds the web together? Think about it. Behind literally every sleek e-commerce site, every endless social media feed, and every news portal you visit, there is a strict underlying structural language doing all the heavy lifting. How are billions, and I mean billions of diverse web pages actually constructed and structured behind the scenes?
Well, to figure that out, we're going to take an architectural journey today. First, we'll look at the birth of HTML. Then, the web's blueprint. Number 3, we'll break down the anatomy of HTML elements. 4, we'll talk about building for accessibility. And finally, number 5, we'll cover some common beginner mistakes.
Okay, Section 1, the birth of HTML and its surprisingly academic origins.
So, the web actually started out in a pretty academic setting. Back in 1989 at CERN in Switzerland, Tim Berners-Lee just needed a really simple way for global researchers to cross-reference their particle physics papers. That's it. But what started as a basic academic tool evolved incredibly fast. It was pushed by passionate engineers, suddenly popularized by the Mosaic browser in 1993, and then, boom, globally standardized by the W3C in 1994.
Moving right along to Section 2, the web's blueprint. Let's talk about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Now, the really crucial thing to understand here is that HTML absolutely cannot do everything. Think about it like building a house. HTML is strictly your structural blueprint. It's the skeleton, the walls, the load-bearing beams. It just defines what content exists and organizes it. But if you want that house to actually look good, well, that's CSS, the paint, the interior decor, the visual style. And if you want the house to do something interactive, like, say, a button that updates a live counter without reloading the whole page, that's JavaScript. That's the electricity, the brain of the house. Honestly, if you expect HTML to handle logic or complex animations, it's kind of like trying to wire a house with a hammer. It just doesn't work.
All right, Section 3, the anatomy of HTML elements, looking specifically at tags and structure.
So an HTML element is your fundamental building block. You basically wrap your content in these things called tags to tell the browser exactly what it's looking at. Usually, you've got an opening tag, your actual content, and then a closing tag. But, there are exceptions. Remember that Mosaic browser we just mentioned? Well, back in the early days, a brilliant programmer named Mark Andreessen boldly introduced the image tag to a discussion group. And the image tag is a perfect example of a self-closing tag. Since it doesn't actually wrap around text content, it simply opens and closes itself all in one go.
Now, there's a really critical distinction here that trips up a ton of developers. Every single HTML document is split into two main areas. The head tag holds all the invisible metadata for the browser. We're talking page titles, character sets, stuff for search engines. But the body tag? That holds absolutely everything you actually see on the screen. Mixing these two up is pretty much a surefire way to instantly break your site structure.
And inside that body tag, your elements generally fall into two layout categories. Block elements, like your headings, are, well, they're kind of greedy. They consume the entire width of the screen and force everything else onto a new line. Inline elements, like links, are way more polite. They only take up the width they actually need, so they can sit happily side by side. Honestly, understanding this difference is the absolute secret to controlling your layout long before you ever write a single line of CSS.
Which brings us to Section 4, building for accessibility and the power of semantic HTML. This is where we run into semantic HTML, or what developers sometimes playfully call POSH, plain old semantic HTML. It basically means using the correct element for its actual intended purpose, not just to make something look a certain way. And why does that matter? Well, browsers actually give semantic elements built-in accessibility hooks totally for free. For instance, if you use a proper native button tag, you automatically get keyboard accessibility right out of the box. A user can tab to it, activate it with the spacebar or the enter key, and you didn't have to write a single line of complex JavaScript to make that happen. On the flip side, bad semantics leads to what we call div soup. That's when you wrap absolutely every piece of content in endless, totally meaningless div tags, which completely strips away that native accessibility we just talked about. Good semantics, though, means using meaningful tags like header, nav, main, and footer. It's a simple choice, really, but it transforms a chaotic mess of code into a super organized document that both search algorithms and actual humans can easily understand.
And the incredibly crucial point here is that screen readers rely entirely on these semantic signposts.
For visually impaired users, the language you use literally shapes their experience. If you use an image, you absolutely must use the alt text attribute. There's a great example from our sources on this. Instead of letting a screen reader just loudly read out a random file name like dinosaur.png, proper alt text describes the image. It paints a picture, something like a red Tyrannosaurus rex, a two-legged dinosaur standing upright like a human. But quick side note, if an image is purely decorative and doesn't add any real context, you should actually just leave that alt attribute totally empty. That way the screen reader knows to skip it and won't distract the user.
Okay, final part. Section 5. Common beginner mistakes and typical HTML pitfalls. Look, when you're first learning the blueprint of the web, making mistakes is absolutely part of the process. But spotting them early, that's going to save you a massive amount of frustration. Here are the really big ones. Forgetting to close your tags. That will completely break your layout, causing your content to just bleed into areas where it definitely shouldn't be. We already talked about the absolute disaster of mixing up your head and body content. Then there's using multiple H1 tags just to make your text look bigger. Remember, H1 is strictly for defining your main topic, not for styling. Oh, and relying on the break tag over and over just to create line spacing? Huge structural error. Remember, layout spacing is CSS's job, not HTML's. Let's look at just a few more pitfalls before we wrap up. Saving files with the wrong extension. Your browser only understands the code if the file literally ends in .html. Missing quotation marks on your attributes. That can silently break your elements without you even realizing. Overusing div tags, which, as we just learned, completely ruins accessibility. Ignoring validation errors is another big one. But honestly, my absolute favorite, and something every single one of us has done, forgetting to refresh the browser. You write the code, you save the file, you look at the browser, and literally nothing changed. Don't panic, you probably just forgot to hit refresh. It's practically a rite of passage, and I promise you, it happens to every single expert developer out there.
And that brings us to the end of our journey today. We've traced HTML from this really humble tool for physicists sharing papers at CERN all the way to the robust semantic blueprint of the modern internet. You now know the vital difference between the invisible head and the visible body, how inline and block elements behave, and exactly why semantic tags are absolutely non-negotiable for web accessibility. So, the only question left to ask is, are you ready to use semantic markup to build a faster, cleaner, and more accessible web? Grab your text editor, start laying down those digital bricks, and I'll see you on the next explainer. Keep learning.